Welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 26 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll learn about a very simple real-time example using ASP.NET checkbox list and listbox controls. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 23, 24, and 25 of this video series. So the example that we are going to look at is I'm going to have this checkbox list control which displays the levels of education. As I make my selections within the checkbox list, those selections must be displayed within this listbox control. And the number of items that I have selected should be shown in a label control here. So here I have 2 items selected, so 2 items selected, and that message should be in black color. Whereas if I don't have any of the items selected, then the list box should be empty and 0 items selected should be shown, and that should be in red color. Let's look at this in action. Let's drag and drop a checkbox list control, and we want to display the list item objects. So let's add the levels of education to this list box, to this checkbox list. So we have the levels of education. By default, the repeat direction is vertical, so let's change it to horizontal. So repeat direction horizontal. Alright, so now as soon as I select something, I want to display those selections in the list box control. So let's drag and drop a list box control onto the web form. So I have this list box control. Let's adjust the size so that all the items get displayed properly. And then we also want a label control. So let's drag and drop that. And let's change the text property of this label control to be empty. Okay. Alright. So whenever I make selections, as soon as I make selections, those selections should be added to this list box control. And when do we do that? Obviously, how do we know if a selection has changed for a checkbox list control? The checkbox list control has got the selected index changed event, okay, which gets fired when you check or uncheck these list item objects of this checkbox list control. Okay, so we can make use of that event. So when I double click the checkbox list control, the event handler for selected index changed get generated, and here we write the code. So what do we basically want to do? As soon as the selection changes, we want to add the selected items to the list box control. And keep in mind, both of these controls are list controls, meaning both of them are actually collections of list item objects. Okay, so now what I want to do is to loop through all the list item objects within this checkbox list control, check which of them are selected, and then take that list item object and add it to the list box control. Okay, so let's do that. Let's loop through each list item object within the checkbox list control. So checkbox list 1 dot items collection, and then if that list item is selected, okay, if the list item is selected, then what we want to do, we want to add that to the list box. So list box is also a collection of list item objects. So listbox1.items.add, and if you look at this add method, it is expecting a list item object to be passed in. Do we have the list item object? Yes, I do have that. So let's go ahead and pass that there. Okay, so that's it. Now let's go ahead and run this and see how far we have got. Now at the minute, as soon as you make a selection, they should be added to this list box, but then look at that, it's not adding them. Why is that? Because the selected index changed event of the checkbox list control is a cached event. It will not immediately post back to the server. If you want to do that, you have to set the auto post back property to true for that checkbox list control. So set the auto post back property to true. So now if we run this, it should add, as soon as I select my item, look at that, that is added to the list box control. Now when I select this item, the next item within the checkbox list control, we are going to get an exception. Okay, cannot have, look at the exception, cannot have multiple items selected when the selection mode is single. Now we have discussed about list box control in the previous session of this video series. Now this list box control can have a single or multiple selection mode. Okay, to solve this error, all you have to do is to set the selection mode property to multiple. Okay, because if you set the selection mode property to single, and then if you look at the code, you're looping through each list item object of the checkbox list control, and then you're fetching each selected item of that checkbox list control and adding that to the list box control. And the list box controls selection mode is single, but then if you select more than one item in the checkbox list control, both of the list item objects within that checkbox list control will have selected property true, and then your list box control selection mode is single. So obviously to a list box control whose selection mode is single, you cannot add more than one list item object whose selected property is set to true. Okay, so now if we run this, what's going to happen? Let's actually cancel that, run that once again. So now the error should go away. So I select diploma. Okay, diploma is selected. I select graduate. There is a slight problem here. Look at that. When I selected graduate, diploma is added twice and graduate once. That's because every time I select, what's going to happen? This event get fired, and then it loops through again and adds the items that we have selected. So it already had diploma the first time, and then when I selected graduate, it's going to add diploma and graduate again. So that's why we have this duplication. So how do we solve that? To simply solve that, you can just say listbox1 dot items dot clear. So every time you come into this event, clear the existing items from the list box and then loop through the checkbox list and then see whichever items are selected, add them to the list box control. Okay, so now when I select this, I have diploma, I have graduate, postgraduate. Okay, so it's working as expected now. Okay, now but then if you look at this, these items are also selected in the list box, and if you look at the presentation here, they're not selected in the list box here. So I don't want these items to be selected in the list box. And how do I prevent that from being selected? It's very simple. If you look at, let's close this now. If you look at the add method of the list box, okay, there are two overloaded versions of this method. One method which takes list item object, and all these list item objects that are being added to the list box has their selected property turned on. That's why they are also selected when added to the list box, and we don't want that. But there is another overloaded version which takes the text of that list item object. So I'm just going to pass the text of the list item object. So now if we run this, since we are not passing in the entire list item object, okay, look at that, I should get only the items that I have selected here, and that too their text is added, since we are not passing in the selected property for that list item object, which will be false by default, hence they will not be selected there. Alright, now what else we want to do? We want to show the number of items that the user has selected. And how do we do that? We have a label control that is capable of displaying that. And if you look at this list box control, it has the number of elements. Okay, so you can use the count property of that list box. So I'm going to say label1.text is equal to, how do I get the number of items selected? I can just say listbox1.items.count. That gives us the total number of items that are present in the list box. Convert that to string, and then we can say items selected. Okay, so let's run this now and see if we get what we expect. So diploma, so one item selected, and it's changing. Okay, but then if I uncheck them, 0 items selected. Okay, we have the message as expected, but then the other thing is we want to show the right color. Okay, so how do we do that? If you know, in the checkbox list, if we don't have any items selected, okay, if checkbox list one dot selected index, we know that it will return -1 if no item is selected. So if the selected index of the checkbox list is -1, then what we want to do, we want to change the color of the label. So label.foreColor. And if you look at the IntelliSense here, the foreColor property expects system.drawing.color. Okay, so system.drawing.color, and we want that to be red color. Else what we want to change the color of that label to be black. Okay, and one last thing, it's bolded as well, so we can do that in the HTML. I want the text within the label control to be bolded, so we can set the font bold is equal to true. Okay, so let's run this now. So one item selected, two items selected. If I uncheck them, 0 items selected, and that too in red color as expected. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.